Hello friends, welcome to the next installment of AHR's IS Institute Mains Analysis. So we've already discussed about some essays in our previous lectures. Now let's look at some more essays which I would be discussing and taking up this in this edition. So as I told you before also, इस बार philosophy के ऊपर भी एक essay आया था which talks about need brings greed. If greed increases, it spoils breed. देखेंगे कि यहाँ पे बहुत अच्छा वर्ड प्ले यूज किया है यूपीएससी ने इज बिकॉज यहाँ पे एक ट्रिक उन्होंने यूज किया है दे बाय यूजिंग द वर्ड ब्रीड नाउ ऐसे ऐसे में यू हैव टू ब्रेक डाउन द स्टेटमेंट इनटू पार्ट्स द फर्स्ट पार्ट ऑफ दिस स्टेटमेंट इज नीड ब्रिंग्स ग्रीड and the second part is if greed increases it spoils breed. Now what breed is it talking about? Okay, it is about talking about the basic integrity of the person, the basic pedigree of the person. हम obviously ये कहते हैं कि ये बहुत महान व्यक्ति है या बहुत विद्वान व्यक्ति है ये सोच के कि वो व्यक्ति he has or she has imbibed a few morals, ethics and has a very strong character, right? This is how we generally look at people. So what happens is this statement is basically about how is it's going to spoil the breed. That means what? Coming generations and their character, right? ठीक है, तो ये अगर आपको चीज समझ गई है दैट मीन्स यू आर थ्रू विद द एसे. तो सबसे पहले ऐसे एसेज में उसका मतलब जानना बहुत जरूरी होता है. अगर आपको मतलब नहीं पता है तो मे बी यू विल फ्लंक इन द एसे, राइट? सो यू हैव टू फोकस ऑन breaking down the essay into sub statements, and beyond that you have to also focus on which are the operational words. So spoiling breed का मतलब हमको यहाँ पे समझ गया है, right? Now need brings greed. Need is what? Need is the basic services or amenities required for a. So let's move to section B. We have a very interesting essay coming up here which talks about near jobless growth in India, an anomaly or an outcome of economic reforms. Now, is this an essay just about jobless growth? सिर्फ jobless growth के बारे में पूछा गया? नहीं. They are asking you whether it's an anomaly or an outcome of economic reforms, right? So they are asking you whether jobless growth is a direct byproduct of economic reforms or an anomaly. Anomaly मतलब in spite of economic reforms, we should have expected jobs to be created, but there is no employment generation. So this is an anomaly. Right? Economic reforms was the kind of dose or the prescription for revamping the Indian economy. So obviously it should have led to a job growth coupled with job creation. But we can see that jobless growth has marked the Indian economy in the past 1 year. So obviously it could be an anomaly also, or it could be a direct outcome also. So when you are propounding the concept of jobless growth in your essay, you have to align your arguments in a way that you have to take a stand, whether it's an anomaly or whether it's a direct outcome. Now let's look at the kind of instructions that were embedded in the economic reforms, right? Economic reforms में actually हुआ क्या था? So economic reforms 1991 we are essentially talking about. So when we talk about 1991 economic reforms, we see that the Indian economy opened up to the world economy, right? So that led to the interconnectedness of markets because the globe was aligning itself with all the domestic and global economies, and India was to be a part of that. Obviously, economic reforms were preceded by a balance of payment crisis. So ये जानना बहुत जरूरी है कि किस backdrop में economic reforms लाए गए थे. Economic reforms are a direct outcome of the balance of payment crisis, right? Because Indian economy was actually an economy which had crony capitalism, which had license raj or red tapeism as the hallmark factors of that. Now, post 1991 economic reforms, what we essentially see is that there was a downsizing of this license raj economy, and we moved towards a more liberal form of economy, and therefore the terminology that is being used, LPG, liberalization, privatization and globalization. But this was not thought of as a progressive reform measure, but this was more like a knee-jerk reaction to the kind of crisis that India was encumbered with, right? So it was in the backdrop of a broken economy. It was in the backdrop of a falling economy, and it was in the backdrop of falling import cover that we ushered in an era of LPG, liberalization, privatization, and globalization. Right? What is liberalization? Liberalization is allowing the private enterprise, allowing the foreign enterprise to set up their shop in the country. That is liberalization, right? Also, that means that doing away with license raj or permit raj that we had seen. So everybody was allowed and everybody was free to open up their shop, and everybody, according to the resources that they possessed, could go in for their own enterprise. So this is liberalization, जहाँ पे हमने काफी सारे licenses, काफी सारे regulations को relax किया गया. Privatization क्या होता है? Privatization is basically wherein the government will divest its share in a lot of enterprises. We see that the banking sector was government dominated, the coal industry was government dominated, even the airlines were government dominated. So the government started coming out of that, and also it paved the way for newer private players and more capable private players to be a part of the growth process. So that is privatization. Now globalization. Globalization is definitely creating new paths and new channels for incoming FDI, foreign direct investment, as well as FIIs, foreign institutional investment. Okay, I will tell you in detail about FDI and FII in the economy lecture series, but as of now, let us understand that the kind of money that was coming into India was it could be traced back to the foreign countries. So जब FDI आता है, FII आता है, तो सिर्फ पैसा नहीं आता है, especially in case of FDI, because जब पैसा आएगा तो it will bring with itself better quality, better management practices, and and it will also result in labor productivity. So the quality of the products and services will improve by leaps and bounds. So, and then connecting it with the global economy, being part of many global forums like World Trade Organization, like regional economic blocs. Okay, so that is reintegrating or recalibrating Indian economy with the world economy. So that is a part of your globalization process, right? So we see that economic reforms were nothing but ushering an era of liberalization, privatization, and globalization, right? Moving beyond that, what we see is that today, now let us look at the essay. It talks about near jobless growth in India. Now, near jobless growth in India is an anomaly of sorts, is because we are growing as a nation. We are registering growth rates of about 4% to 7%, right? So obviously, what we will deduce from this is that growth तो हो रहा है, तो job creation भी होना चाहिए, but job creation नहीं हो रहा है और सिर्फ growth हो रहा है. So isn't it a little baffling and confusing, right? It will flummox the average mind, because growth according to general mentality or according to average mentality has to be coupled with job creation. Okay, so moving along, what we see, as I said, that today we are saddled with the prospects and the problems of jobless growth, right? Now that is, what are the major reasons for that? The major reasons, to find the major reasons for that, you should go back to the Indian economy at the eve of independence. So what was the nature of the Indian economy at the eve of independence? Basically, we started with the primary sector, which was dominated by agriculture, right? And then after 1991, we leapfrogged, and we now see that service sector plays a major role and contributes about 60% to the gross domestic product of the country. But what about the secondary sector, the manufacturing sector? So don't we see here a clear anomaly, because we are jumping from primary sector towards tertiary sector without involving ourselves with the secondary sector. So manufacturing as an aspect of GDP or as a component of Indian economy was, I would say, not completely ignored, but definitely was kept on the back burner. Manufacturing growth, the growth in industrialization, did not really touch India as it should have, as we have seen in the Chinese example, isn't it? So when we talk about this anomaly, we should also talk about service sector-led growth. And service sector-led growth, although it brings in a lot of money, it brings in a lot of foreign direct investment, but the number of people it employs is far less than the number of people that would be employed with the manufacturing sector, isn't it? So the failure in ushering in labor-intensive manufacturing is one of the reasons. Also, that we were always an import-oriented economy. So we failed to move from import substitution towards export orientation. Chinese economy को आप देख लीजिए, it is an export oriented economy. They just don't focus on the domestic demand and domestic consumption. They also focus on international demand and the demand for their goods and services in the western developed markets especially, right? So आज भी हम देखेंगे कि इंडिया में इंपोर्ट सब्स्टिट्यूशन पॉलिसी से बढ़ उठ के हमने एक्सपोर्ट ओरिएंटेशन की तरफ कदम नहीं बढ़ाए, okay? And therefore that also explains that why we are going all guns blazing for Make in India program. So when you talk about Make in India program, you talk about digital growth, you talk about labor intensive manufacturing, and then you integrate all these concepts with how till today our economy was not based on manufacturing. That is one of the major reasons why we are experiencing a near jobless growth, because it is the manufacturing sector which would involve a lot of formal employment, a lot of organized sector would be integrated into that. But हम ये देख रहे हैं कि या तो people are employed in the informal sector, that is the disorganized economy, otherwise they are employed in the services sector, right? The number of people employed in the services sector is far less in number as compared to number of people that could be employed in the manufacturing sector. But manufacturing sector and its near non-existence in India, I wouldn't say complete non-existence, but looking at the sheer length and breadth of the country, the kind of manufacturing that we should have had has not taken place. And therefore, this manufacturing should have been the giant of Indian economy. But today, it's nothing more than a dwarf. So that is why we are also experiencing jobless growth. So you should talk about that. You should talk about our failure to move from import substitution to export oriented strategy. Okay. Also make sure that in your essay you talk about tax incentives, you talk about subsidies, you talk about depreciation allowances, you talk about all these government interventions which are solely linked to the amount invested and not to the number of jobs created. यहाँ पे हम जो सब्सिडी स्ट्रक्चर देख रहे हैं या जो टैक्स इंसेंटिव्स देख रहे हैं या जो टैक्स हॉलिडेज देख रहे हैं, those are meant for the capitalist class. But are we integrating these freebies by the government with job creation? यहाँ पे job creation का mention कहीं है नहीं है, because we are only focusing on the input cost, that the input cost should come down. But at the end of the day, we are not focusing on creating more number of jobs. And creating more number of jobs is also a function of not just manufacturing, but creating innovative strategies also. And innovation and research and development for a very long period of time in the economic history of India has been not so significant. Okay, so you also can include this factor, right? कुछ figures आप अगर डाल देंगे according to the economic survey, तो I would think your answer will be embellished and become more hard hitting. Like in 2015, we've seen only 1.35 lakh jobs being created. Okay, as compared to 2011, wherein about 9 lakh jobs were created. So you can see that there is a clear-cut decline in the number of jobs being created. Now, what really happened after 2011 and between 2015, that so less number of jobs are being created, is because also you can talk about automation and machine learning. Automation and machine learning have made a lot of jobs redundant and obsolete, right? So a lot of jobs in the banking sector, a lot of jobs in the manufacturing sector or in the assembly line production are being taken up by the machines, and that is not complemented with skill upgradation. So a white collar worker or a blue collar worker जिनका skill upgradation नहीं हो रहा है, eventually they will be out of the mainstream because machines will take over. So skill upgradation के बारे में बात कीजिए कि क्यों skill upgradation होना चाहिए और कैसे skill mismatch हो रहा है global competition के साथ, and also talk about less mechanization in the agricultural sector. When you talk about less mechanization in the agricultural sector, you're talking about low agricultural productivity, and whenever there is low agricultural productivity, the number of people employed productively in the agricultural sector will also go down eventually. Mechanization needs से ज़्यादा लोग लगेंगे, I understand that, but at the end of the day, if the agricultural productivity is low, the number of formal employment that would be guaranteed with the agricultural sector will also come down, right? Because the capacity to pay people their salaries will be less for the rich farmers. Why? Is because of the low agricultural yield. So these things have been taken. You should commit these things to your memory, and these things should reflect in your answers, in your essays also. That would make your answers and your essays more hard hitting. So like, I'm just giving you a frame, a construct as to how to design and craft your essay. अगर आप इस हिसाब से आपका essay design करते हैं, So your essay becomes a fully encompassing essay because it has a systemic perspective, right? Not just that, you don't have to stop here. You can also talk about how the rise in education levels in India have not seen a proportionate rise in the number of government jobs that we have, or the kind of jobs that the private sector is also creating. Education levels, अगर हम बात करें higher education and college education, the basic education levels in the society are coming up, but are the jobs which are being created equally in number with that? No, because जहां पे जॉब क्रिएशन नहीं होगा और एजुकेशन लेवल बढ़ते जाएगा तो कंपटीशन बढ़ने वाला, कंपटीशन बढ़ेगा तो व्हाट वी कैन सी इज दैट मेनी पीपल विल बी left out in the lurch, and when many people are left out in the lurch they'll again go back to the government sector. मगर गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर में तो जॉब्स बढ़ नहीं रहे, इनफैक्ट जॉब्स कम हो रहे. अगेन दैट कुड बी अ फैक्टर ऑफ राइजिंग ऑटोमेशन एंड मशीन लर्निंग, राइट, एंड ई गवर्नेंस आल्सो. सो जहां पे लोग माइग्रेट हो रहे हैं प्राइवेट सेक्टर की तरफ से गवर्नमेंट सेक्टर की तरफ, वहां पे भी कंपटीशन बढ़ते जा रहा है. सो एजुकेशन लेवल्स इंक्रीज होने के बावजूद आपका जॉब एम्प्लॉयमेंट या जॉब क्रिएशन नहीं हो रहा है. There was a very recent example that I saw, that I read in the newspapers, that for the job of the sewer workers in UP, people having MBA degrees are also applying. Isn't this complete dilution of the skills that we are producing today? Also, not just that, the employability of an average Indian graduate is also very less, or also very low, because the average Indian graduate would require more number of training hours within the country. So on the job training में भी बहुत सारे कंपनीज का पैसा इन्वेस्ट होते जा रहा है. एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी क्यों नहीं है, क्यों एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी कम है? इज बिकॉज ऑफ लिमिटेड इंडस्ट्री इंटरफेस. is when you are undergoing your graduation, your exposure to industry and its values and its norms and its coming technologies is less, and therefore when the child or a person graduates, what really happens is that the degree is not commensurate with the kind of work that is to be done, right? So yahan pe again, people who have done academically well, people who have a background of scholarship will definitely get a job, but people with average credentials will be again left out in the lurch, right? So we have to create more jobs, not just in the private sector but also in the government sector, right? So अब आप सोचेंगे कि ऑटोमेशन और मशीन लर्निंग इतना हो रहा है तो ऑब्वियसली पीपल आर गोइंग टू लूज देयर जॉब्स. व्हेन पीपल लूज देयर जॉब्स, देयर हैज टू बी अ सोर्स ऑफ अल्टरनेटिव एम्प्लॉयमेंट, एंड इफ देयर हैज टू बी अ सोर्स ऑफ अल्टरनेटिव एम्प्लॉयमेंट, यू हैव टू क्रिएट मोर जॉब्स, राइट? अब ये जॉब्स आएंगे कहां से? ओनली व्हेन यू अपग्रेड द स्किल्स ऑफ द पीपल, राइट? सो स्किल अपग्रेडेशन को एम्प्लॉयबिलिटी के साथ आप मैच कीजिए, मार्केट कोऑर्डिनेशन के साथ मैच कीजिए, इंडस्ट्री इंटरफेस के साथ मैच कीजिए, so then you can say that jobless growth could also be a result of a rising education system and not just economic reforms. So जब आप ऐसे लिख रहे हैं तो आप ये भी लिख सकते हैं कि it is not only a direct outcome of 1991 economic reforms, it is not only an anomaly, but there are other systemic factors also which are responsible for the education, for the jobless growth, right? अब growth तो है ही ना, because service sector is expanding and advancing, right? So obviously growth is there, but it has to be coupled with job led growth. अब हम सारी policies जो बनाते हैं, those are growth led policies. हमने now the government should start making policies which are employment led policies, जहाँ पे policies का जो end point है या जो objective है should not only be growth but employment generation. इसीलिए मेक इन इंडिया बिकम्स वेरी क्रिटिकल इन दिस एस्पेक्ट, ठीक है? मेक इन इंडिया के बारे में ज्यादा लिखने की जरूरत नहीं है बिकॉज बात चल रही है जॉबलेस ग्रोथ की इस ऐसे में. तो हो सकता है कि आप मेक इन इंडिया और स्टैंड अप इंडिया, स्टार्टअप इंडिया, इन स्कीम्स के बारे में लिखना शुरू कर देंगे तो सम ऑफ योर वर्ड लिमिट विल बी इन्वेस्टेड. जस्ट मेक श्योर दैट यू मेंशन दिस स्कीम्स एंड गिव अ होप और अ विजन that such schemes would definitely go a long way in forging better ties between the fresh graduates and the markets and how their jobs are being rolled out. Okay, so this is how you should convey your idea in your essay. Once you do that, I don't think it should become a problem for you to get good marks in the essay, right? Isme guys, one more important aspect that you have to consider is the contribution and the element of small and medium scale enterprises. Now these small and medium enterprises actually are contributing 40% or 45% of the labor force. are also contributing 40% to the country's GDP. But in spite of that, the policies are not well aligned or recalibrated as to further the growth objectives of the SME sector. So SME sector के लिए क्या करना चाहिए? There has to be positive intervention by the government, that there should be government linked subsidy schemes, government linked growth schemes for SMEs. But ये हो नहीं रहा है is because policies are well aligned towards the high growth or high or the capitalist or industrialist. But SME sector is the one that employs a lot of people, so it needs government regulation, it needs government support. मगर हम जहाँ government support की बात करते हैं तो the proponents of capitalism or the proponents of liberalism will say कि आप वापस से लाइसेंस राज की तरफ जा रहे हैं, फिर से आपका घुमाव लाइसेंस राज की तरफ से हो रहा है. सो दिस इज द रिवर्सल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक रिफॉर्म्स, ऐसा कहा जाता है मगर ऐसा है नहीं, क्योंकि once you empower the SME sector, you're ensuring the empowerment of 45% of your labor workforce, right? And therefore they should have access to better credit facilities, they have access to cheap credit, they should have access to clean development mechanisms, they should have access to better technologies. So thoda sa realignment with the Gandhian era or realignment with the Nehruvian doctrine, or even how Deen Dayal Upadhyay said that SME should become the backbone and the foundation stone of Indian economy, ये आपको ऐसे में integrate करना जरूरी है. Once you incorporate such points in your essay becomes a full-fledged essay. Now what to write in the conclusion, because ये एक ऐसा है essay है जहाँ पे conclusion becomes fairly critical, because conclusion में समझ में आएगा examiner को कि आपका stand क्या है, what are you saying actually, कि 1991 economic reforms का direct by product है या anomaly है या कुछ और है. तो ideally what you should write, I wouldn't really prescribe you one single solution, but ideally I feel that you should write that 1991 economic reforms to a certain extent could be responsible in an indirect manner for the jobless growth. But although it also sounds a little paradoxical, so there is an element of anomaly, and then but state that there are some certain clear-cut outcomes of this narrative, which is providing support to the SME sector, realigning nationalist policies with job orientation, and also the fact that things like crony capitalism, nepotism should be kept in check by using measured responses and by going in for checks and balances. So इस तरह से आप अगर आगे का vision देते हैं, and if your essay if you're creating a fine balance between economic reforms, anomaly, and the future, your essay becomes a balanced one. So this is how I feel that you should attempt this essay. Go when you after this lecture, I believe that you should take a pen and paper and jot your points down. At least make a frame of this essay, because this a kind of question would be asked next year also, maybe in GS3 or maybe even in GS1 or GS2, right? So a good and a deep understanding of this topic would go a long way in ensuring that your GS preparation moves in the right direction. So having discussed about 4 essays from this year's UPSC Mains 2016, let us move on to the set of next 4 essays. 2 of them belong to the syllabus of polity, and 2 of them would belong to digitization and other contemporary technologies which are coming up. So we move on to the section B, in that you have digital economy, a leveler of or a source of economic inequality. So digital economy as a concept क्या है और उसने achieve क्या किया है? Is digital economy achieving social parity in economic sphere of life, or is digital economy creating a divide, as the famous saying goes, whether the rich are getting the richer and poor are getting poorer, right? So this requires you to take a stand. Now, before taking a stand, it's essential for you to explore and delve deeper into both the strands. You have to delve deeper into talking about the positives of digitization and the negatives of digitization, and then you can take a stand, you can form your own opinion based on the facts, information, and empirical evidence that you have mentioned in your answer sheet. Okay, so let's look at, first of all, need to understand what's a digital economy, right? Now, a digital economy is an economy whose backdrop or whose spine is the digitization. So what is digitization? Digitization is a part of e-governance, digitization of records, moving towards a cashless form of economy, building government-based apps and public security systems, also bringing agricultural sector into the fold of digitization by integrating the panchayats with broadband networks, Wi-Fi enabling of major tourist attractions in the country, and also delivery of basic services and amenities on an online platform, right? There are so many online platforms wherein you can apply for your passport, wherein you can apply for a visa. Also there are so many online platforms for which serve as the grievance redressal mechanisms, which also serve as the single window clearance system of India. So that improves the ease of doing business in the country also, and that greatly enhances the delivery of public services and amenities for the purposes of welfare, right? So that is a digital economy. A digital economy ka, obviously, as I said, the spine would be your digital network in the country, and that digital network in the country can only be established once you realize your national optic fiber network throughout the length and breadth of the country. It was envisaged under the stewardship of Mr. Sam Pitroda in 2011. And since then, what we have seen is that a lot of villages and a lot of panchayats have been brought into the mainstream and the fold of digitization or connected on the platform of internet. But do we have all the 6 lakh districts or all of these areas which are Wi-Fi enabled? Do we have all the panchayats integrated with the national network? So that connectivity has to be ensured, right? Connectivity होने की वजह से ही you can move towards a digital economy. अगर आप demonetization का भी issue के बारे में लिखते हैं, you talk about moving towards cashless economy, that would also be a part of that. So yes, it's a leveler because internet is a sort of a democracy in motion. Internet does not distinguish between people, right? But at the same time, the access to that internet, access to information becomes critical. And therefore, without having a viable and a robust physical infrastructure, you cannot hope to move towards a digital form of economy or even e-governance. ये आपको एग्जाम में लिखना पड़ेगा. Only then you can establish further ground to evaluate this essay better. ठीक है, let us see that leveler कैसा है, because as I said, it's about social justice. When everybody has access to internet, that is social justice, because you're extending a free and a fair platform to all the citizens of your population. Therefore, it becomes a leveler. Everybody has equal access to opportunities. Everybody has equal access to basic services and amenities. There is no leakages of funds. There is less scope for corruption. Also, the bidding process for government projects as well as private projects becomes a completely transparent process, right? You also have to look at the other side of the issue. What is the flip side of the coin? The flip side of the coin is that it could also lead to a dangerous situation wherein the gap between the haves and the have-nots gets bigger and bigger and bigger. क्यों ऐसा हो सकता है? क्योंकि if you don't have the requisite physical infrastructure, if you don't have enough people using smartphones in the country, if your panchayats are not enabled with broadband services, if the national optics fiber network policy doesn't materialize into a successful venture, what will happen is that the mainstreaming of people will not happen. People will not be brought into the mainstream of the society, and the mainstream of the society mainly functions in a big way on social platforms today, right? So if you want to bring in or usher in an era of digitization in the agricultural sector, the first the thing that is indispensable is that people should have access to internet. People should have incomes that allows them to buy smartphones. Yes, we are a nation with the second highest teledensity in the world, but at the same time, we have to ensure that the smartphone market in India and the penetration of smartphones, it goes beyond the urban pockets, and also that the internet services are faster and cheaper, right? We have also seen that with the advent of 4G technology, 4G networks, internet services have become efficient and faster. But to what extent will they be able to aid and assist this growth of the process of social mainstreaming is something that only time can tell us, right? So you talk about all these things in your essay. वैसे this essay is a very straightforward one, but I would suggest that you include some examples and illustrate your thoughts by using real life situations like demonetization, like linking agriculture with communication satellites, wherein farmers have access to the weather patterns, the wind patterns, and the onset of southwest monsoon. At the same time, you need to have a robust banking network because banks are the channels which ensure fluidity of cash. And since we are moving towards a cashless economy, transactions have to be made on an online platform. Since we are moving towards that, it is essential that our panchayats are Wi-Fi enabled and everybody has access to cheap and efficient smartphones, right? So these are the riders which are involved. No doubt that digital economy has its own merits and attributes. But whether it will accrue benefits to the society at large, whether it will ensure social justice or not, whether it will ensure in an era of a democracy on internet is something that only time can tell, is something which is dependent on creation of physical infrastructure and is also dependent on political will and political leadership. Okay, so जहाँ तक political will और leadership की बात है, very recently we have seen that the government is more than willing to move towards a more modern form of economy in the form of a digital economy. You can also talk about digital currency. You can also talk about how bitcoins are not just a rarity today, but are used to transact on the internet. Although these activities are malified and conducted under the radar, but in the future we can create a formal legal digital currency. We can also talk about not bitcoins but Bharat coins in the future, right? So you can talk about all these things in your essay. You can also talk about how in a digital economy journalism has to play a very important role because it is the print media and the digital media which is the mouthpiece of the government, also which is the mouthpiece of the public, right? So it acts as a licensing agent between the government and the public, and therefore, and since we have access to information 24/7, it becomes almost mandatory upon us that the journalistic ethic in the country is maintained at the highest level. Otherwise, it could foment a lot of trouble. It could foment a lot of racial divide, a lot of caste divide, or a lot of religious divide. ऐसे elements, ऐसे innovative elements आप आपके essay में add कीजिए. I'm sure your essay will become more hard hitting and you'll get more marks. Let's look at one more essay on the same lines, which talks about cyberspace and internet, blessing or curse to the human civilization in the long run. Again, a very fairly simple essay coming from the same stable of globalization, digitization, cyberspace, internet, and all of that. So you can talk about remote sensing technologies, how they are determining better crop growing seasons, how they are essentially facilitating the farmers in planning their harvest seasons better. You can talk about how communication satellites have not just helped a lot of industries, but have also helped the Indian Army very recently in conveying the coordinates of the enemy targets, right? So obviously, internet will go a long way in facilitating an environment, fostering an environment wherein everybody is made a part of the growth process and life becomes easy. That is one of the bedrocks of internet. Also, connectivity is no more an issue. So therefore, internet is the reason for the planet which has become a global village now, right? ठीक है, तो ये सारी चीजें आप लिख सकते हैं. साइबर स्पेस कैसे ये यूज किया जाता है फॉर integration of opinions, marshalling of many strands of thoughts, and also consolidating a public opinion. Cyberspace में हम देखते हैं कि there are app based platforms. So education is also moving from the brick and mortar model towards the online model, wherein you just need a decent internet connection. You will have access to all the quality online lectures as well as all the news printed in the media, right? So that is one of the hallmarks of cyberspace and internet, isn't it? So till date, we have seen that the blessings of the internet have far outweighed the curse to the human civilization. But it talks about human civilization in the long run. तो आपको इस ऐसे में अब तक जो हुआ उस पे तो फोकस करना ही है, मगर आगे क्या होने वाला है और what kind of benefits, advantages, disadvantages, merits and demerits could be associated with cyberspace and internet. सबसे पहली बात तो साइबर बुलिंग की बात आप कीजिए कि there are trolls on the internet, right? So you have a Twitter handle, or if you post something on the Facebook, and if you are a public figure, you will be trolled. This is called as cyber bullying, right? Wherein uh, intense digs are taken at you, wherein you are made fun of, you are made the butt of all jokes, isn't it? So cyber bullying के बारे में आप लिखिए कैसे cyber bullying is also the reason for a lot of suicides in the country. कैसे the national mental health policy is also taking into consideration the adverse effects of cyberbullying. So you can talk about that. You can talk about how it sinks the youth of the youth of the country into depression. So you can talk about that aspect as well, isn't it? So cyberspace के in the long run, in the future, कई सारे ऐसे चीजें हैं जो which have to be taken into account and also have to be dealt with very seriously. We have also seen that a global terrorist organization like ISIS was able to recruit people even from Kerala and so on and so forth from many parts of the world. Why was this possible? It was the internet which made it possible, right? Then the internet becomes a medium for good governance. The internet becomes a medium for investigative journalism, wherein things like Panama Papers and the Edward Snowden scandal have come into the picture. जहाँ पे हमने देखा कि many big politicians, many people of national and international repute, their shady investment and their money laundering came into the focus. So obviously this again you can talk about integrity, you can talk about how good governance could be ensured, but at the same time how today with the advent of internet many antisocial elements are also able to link up together or also able to synthesize their own energies. So you can talk about all these things. You can talk about how body shaming is done on the internet, right? You can talk about how women face a lot of problems and a lot of threats, especially on the pornographic sites where their images are mobbed onto other images. So this poses a serious threat to the integrity of a person, right? You can talk about that. You can talk about the hackers which are present, which would hack into your own account. So your critical data and its privacy could become a myth in the future. Very recently, we had seen that about 3 lakh accounts were hacked, right? So this element again, this is an element from your current affairs, should be included, isn't it? So this is how you can say that in the long run, the cyberspace and internet will have to be heavily guarded by laws, rules and regulations and by international conventions and frameworks, right? There are so many international conventions and frameworks which you could mention in your essay. Okay, you can also talk about the digital policy of India. You can talk about Digital India program and its 9 pillars, but you can also talk about how global regulation of internet and virtual space has become an absolute mandate of the ruling governments, right? So privacy of data becomes an issue. Everybody has an Aadhaar number today. Services are going to be delivered based on that Aadhaar number because it is a unique identification number. Once that data is fudged or manufactured, it could lead to the problems of inclusion and exclusion. Inclusion or exclusion कब होता है? जब because of ghost beneficiaries and duplication of data, जिसको वो सुविधा मिलनी चाहिए वो उसको ना मिलते हुए किसी और इंसान को मिल जाती है. So यहाँ पे the problem of ghost beneficiaries could become very challenging for the present day order. These are the things that you should include in an essay like this. So I think this essay becomes pretty straightforward. It's only about how you articulate. This essay is not about how you evaluate. Evaluation तो सभी करेंगे मगर आपका articulation जो रहेगा, जो continuity आपके essay में रहेगी, वो जरूरी है. End of the day, long run पे focus कीजिए. Long run is something that you have to mention and you have to focus on in your answer is because You have to talk about the future in this essay. You don't have to talk about what benefits have been accrued to the society till now. Talk about future, talk about the aspects which are emerging. Okay, so these are the things that need to be taken into account. Now let's see the last part, wherein I'll be discussing in brief the polity related essays. Uh, Polity related essays have been fairly straightforward, simple. I don't feel the need to talk much about them except for the fact that there are certain things which you should keep in mind while discussing cooperative federalism. Mention how Granville Austin, the constitutional expert, said that India is the harbinger of cooperative federalism. You can also talk about the SR Bommai case. You can also talk about the Union of Rajasthan versus, the state of Rajasthan versus the Union of India 1997 case. So cooperative federalism myth है या reality? देखिए myth तो definitely नहीं है, ठीक है? But there are certain instances wherein we might be induced or influenced to believe that it could be a myth. In terms of, देखिए, India is known as an indestructible union of destructible states. That is the bedrock of cooperative federalism. मगर हमने देखा क्या है कि इंडस्ट्रियलाइजेशन जो हुआ है वेस्टर्न पार्ट ऑफ द कंट्री में ज्यादा हुआ है. सो व्हाट हैपेंस इज, जो स्टेट्स है, बाकी जो स्टेट्स है, they have not contributed, and therefore that is leading to migration. So other states like Uttar Pradesh, Bihar and other poor performing states, they and lack of political will in these states for welfare and for growth has kind of resulted into migration into other states. और जब माइग्रेशन इनटू अदर स्टेट हो जाता है तो सन्स ऑफ द सॉइल डॉक्ट्रिन पिक्चर में आ जाता है. तो सन्स ऑफ द सॉइल डॉक्ट्रिन जब पिक्चर में आ जाएगा तो obviously it is going to result into a flawed or a fractured or a shaky political philosophy wherein the politics of exclusion will be used, right? जो हमने महाराष्ट्र में भी देखा. तो ये सारी चीजें भी आप लिख सकते हैं आपके ऐसे में. देखिए, सिंस फैमिली प्लानिंग सदर्न स्टेट्स में हुआ था और नॉर्थ इंडियन स्टेट्स में नहीं हुआ था, तो आप देखेंगे कि लोकसभा में जो मेजर रिप्रेजेंटेशन है दैट इज फ्रॉम द नॉर्थ इंडियन स्टेट्स एंड लेसर फ्रॉम द साउथ इंडियन स्टेट्स. अब ये again goes against the grain of cooperative federalism. So again, we might be forced to believe that cooperative federalism is not after all such a good pill for the problem of India or the situation, unique peculiar situation of India, है ना? But reality क्या है? It's a reality is because today we are seeing that states are using their comparative advantages, especially अब GST आ जाने के बाद they will use it as a leverage to compete with each other on a national scale as regards manufacturing is concerned, as regards the development of service sector is concerned. So reality to hai. Also the fact that India has enjoyed interstate connectivity. We have interstate water tribunals also. We have interstate councils and zonal councils. ये सारी चीजें आपके पॉलिटी के बुक्स में दी हुई है. So obviously it's a reality, and cooperative federalism is the only way ahead for a country like India. Why would I say that? Is because, see, India is a country which has a multitude of problems. Okay, the problems are multifarious, the solutions are multifarious. We have a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multilingual society. So the problems are in multitudes, and therefore these multitudes have to be integrated with each other, right? And only cooperative federalism can ensure that. In the starting of your answer, you can also say that you can look at the positive examples of United States of America, Australia, and Germany and Switzerland also, which actually propound and sponsor center-state relations. Also, the fact that cooperative federalism becomes absolutely pivotal to their political progress, right? So you can back up your opinion with these facts and data. I think this is again, I would say that this was an essay which should have been in the news, or which should have been attempted by you, because Uttarakhand situation was already there, the presidential rule in Uttarakhand, right? So ये ऐसे जो आया है, it has a direct correlation with current affairs. So a systematic or a smart study of your current affairs would give you a fair idea about what kind of essays will appear in your examination. So anybody who must have gone through the issue or would have studied the issue in the recent past would have given a correct current context in the examination. And I'm sure most of you next year would also do the same and not repeat the mistake or not commit the mistake of not integrating current affairs in your essays. Okay. Now, the last essay that I would like to discuss or like to throw some light on is the water disputes between states in federal India. This comes again from the concept of federalism, because the federation of states also means, as I told you, it also means that some problems are going to arise because of the changing topography, changing demography, and also the changing economic and cultural situation, जो कि हमने कावेरी रिवर वाटर डिस्प्यूट में वेरी रिसेंटली देखा गया है. सो वाटर डिस्प्यूट्स बिटवीन स्टेट्स इन फेडरल इंडिया, इसके क्या डायमेंशंस है, इसके लिमिट्स क्या है, इसका रेलिवेंस क्या है, अभी तक हिस्टोरिकली क्या देखा गया है, आगे चैलेंजेस कैसे है, और इसके लिए आपका प्रिस्क्रिप्शन क्या रहेगा. इसके लिए कावेरी रिवर वाटर डिस्प्यूट आपने देखना चाहिए. ऑल्सो नॉट जस्ट द डिस्प्यूट्स बट द थिंग्स which have reached a culmination regarding other river water disputes जहाँ पे problems arise नहीं हुए हैं. You can also talk about how Maharashtra is sharing its water with Karnataka and Tamil Nadu in case of Godavari. वहाँ पे तो कोई dispute नहीं है. So you can use these examples as the shining beacons of cooperative federalism and how water disputes can be resolved by instituting a process of dialogue, right? So इस हिसाब से आपको ये ऐसे लिखना है. There is so much that I could have told you about this essay, but my one liner for you is to toe the line of D.D. Basu or Lakshmikant and exactly replicate that idea on your paper. Also introduce an element of current affairs. Your essay becomes complete. But challenge क्या है इस essay में? Do you have the enough content to write it with more than 1,000 words? Because problem ये हो जाता है कि कई बच्चों के पास कंटेंट है बट वो 1000 वर्ड से नीचे होगा. तो आपको आपके पास थोड़ा ज्यादा कंटेंट होना चाहिए, थोड़ी ज्यादा केसेस आपने रिफर करनी चाहिए. ऑल्सो आपने कोऑपरेटिव फेडरलिज्म क्या होता है उसके बारे में बात करनी चाहिए, इंटरजोनल काउंसिल्स के बारे में बात करनी चाहिए, और जो ये क्वाजिट जुडिशियल बॉडीज है, वाटर ट्राइब्यूनल्स, उनके लिमिटेशंस और चैलेंजेस क्या है उसके बारे में बात करना चाहिए. So guys, with this we come to the conclusion of the second part of our GS essay paper. In the future editions, I would be talking in detail about General Studies 2, 3 and 4. So again, I'd like to thank you, all of you, for visiting AHR's IS Institute and spending your valuable time here. I'm sure that we are adding a lot of value to your preparation. Our commitment to you is to deliver good quality lectures and also to open up your mind to a range of possibilities and explore the nature and depth of the syllabus that is there. As I have already told you, we are also coming up with the static GS portion and its lecture series. So keep a check on these things and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well.